if I'm driven completely by greed, I mean, you could say in one sense, and you and I both disagreed that that's necessarily the case with people. They're trying to better themselves. That's what America is all about, the American dream and all that. But what if we were just good? Who are these other people to pass judgment on my character, for goodness sake? All right? Because even if I'm motivated by greed, as you're pointing out, the notion of the exchange of goods and services is based in almost every single case on complete liberty.
There was a point in here to kind of go off on a little bit of a rabbit trail that you made, and it resonated with me because I was having a conversation about this with a friend of mine not too long ago. You were talking about what Jesus meant by the poor when he referenced them in the Old Testament, and that it wasn't simply a lack of money. Because me and my friend, we were having a discussion about, well, is there a point, say it's like pastors, when they make so much money that it becomes immoral? And, my basic argument was there isn't any nobility in poverty, right? I think if you can do well for yourself, that's fine. And, you talked about in the book how simply being in poverty doesn't cause people to act badly. And one thing, I've gotten from Steven Crowder is that money amplifies character. So if you're a generous person, you're going to be generous with the little you have, or if you have a lot. And somebody who's greedy, even if they're poor, they're still going to be greedy, whether they have a little bit of money or a lot of money.
Right. No, that's a great observation. Jesus said it like this. It isn't what actually used two different ways of characterizing. He said, from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So it's what's inside that comes out, for example, in the mouth. And I'm just making a parallel to what you do with your funds. If you're greedy and poor, you're still going to be greedy. If you're greedy and rich, you're going to be greedy. But if you're generous and poor, you're going to be generous with what little you have. And if you're rich and you're generous, you're going to do that. So it's the inside that describes it. And Jesus also food in this particular case. Now, the Jews were really strict about the foods they ate, but what came out of them was vice, not virtue. And it's not the foods that go into you that matter, Jesus, but rather the virtues that come out of you, hopefully, instead of the vices that make the biggest difference. So what you just described is really Jesus' point of view in general. And Jesus in the book of John said, the poor you always have with you. But and his point was not to denigrate the poor, but there was expensive oil that was used to anoint his feet, that the disciples, actually it was Judas, who the text said was pilfering from the money box, who said we could have sold that and put the money in and given it to the poor. And he's thinking he can steal it, basically. Right. But Jesus said, this was done to honor me before my death. And that's more important than the poor. And so he's putting things in perspective. The poor, let's see, we have a responsibility to the poor. I mean, this is clear throughout the scriptures, in the Old Testament, the Gospels. But what ends up happening is social justice becomes a Marxist approach to looking at the economy. The poor are poor because they've been abused and because the wealth has been taken from them by other people. And that's a different discussion, but I'm just saying that phrase is informed by a different worldview that I don't think is sound, okay? When there's injustice, it ought to be taken care of. But being poor is not an injustice in itself. And it is not necessarily an evidence of injustice that's been done. And that's why it's interesting when you look in the Gospels, for all of the talk that many folks make about the responsibility of social justice in Jesus, it turns out he said almost nothing about it. Now, if people disagree with this, all they have to do is read the Gospels. I started in the Gospel of John. I found not a single reference in the entire Gospel of John, which was the final gospel, the greatest characterization of the person and the work of Christ ever written, not a single reference to anything that could be marginally construed as social justice or caring for the poor. The lone reference to the poor was this dismissal that I mentioned to you a moment ago. And now you're going to find some more in others. There were 4 or 5 major discourses of Jesus the Sermon on the Mount, the Bread of Life discourse, the Upper Room discourse, and the Olivet discourse. And those four major discourses, the three of them, no mention of anything that pertained to social justice. The only one that sounded a little bit like it might be the Sermon on the Mount, but Jesus didn't say, "Blessed are the poor." He said,
Right.
"Blessed are the poor in spirit."
Mm-hmm.
In other words, those who acknowledge their spiritual poverty. There are people, and Jesus ran into lots of them, who were not poor, but they were poor in spirit. Okay? And then Nicodemus, for example, Joseph of Arimathea, they had wealth, they had standing, but they came to Christ with humility. Now they kind of stayed on the fringe a little bit because there was pressure from their friends not to to be too public about it. But in any event, Joseph of Arimathea was the one who took Jesus' body and put it in his own tomb. Okay, so those people were rich but poor in spirit. Then you have other people who are they're poor, but they're not poor in spirit. In other words, they may not have very much money, but they still think that on their own they can satisfy the needs and demands of God. Jesus' concern was not with wealth. Jesus' concern was with our spiritual condition. He didn't just welcome the marginalized and put off the wealthy. He welcomed repentant people regardless of their status, and he put off those who were not repentant. He condemned those who wouldn't come to him, poor or rich. Now, we don't have a lot of examples of the poor who, I'm trying to think right now, but they don't stand out, of poor who did not come to him, because generally it was the poor who were the poor in spirit too. They were the downtrodden, and they knew they needed. And Jesus himself said it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. But what's key here is the reason. It had nothing to do with their economic status. It had to do with the status of their heart.
That's an excellent way of putting it. And I think it was something really brilliant what you just said, because I've always talked about this idea of social justice being inherently a contradiction to actual justice. And I really like the way you said it, adding an adjective to the word justice corrupts it, because justice is blind to race, it's blind to economic status.
Right.
Justice is just doing what's right.
Yeah.
And so you shouldn't need to add anything to it.
In the Hebrew scriptures, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it says explicit. I think it's in the Pentateuch, in the law. It said, "Do not favor the poor in judgment." It's a command in the Mosaic law not to favor the poor in judgment. So for all the concern that the scripture has for the poor, helping the poor, especially those who are poor because they have been treated unjustly, even so, we have to be careful not to favor them just because they're poor. In the current situation of social justice, that seems to be the point. Because they're poor, they ought to be favored over others that have more money. This is, by the way, the notion behind the graduated income tax system, just as an observation.
Right.
But I think the impulse that a lot of people have is based on this saying, and I don't know, just tell me if you think this notion sounds familiar. From each according to his ability. From each according to his ability. So the poor have less ability, they have to give less. The rich have so much more, so they have to pay their fair share, right? Okay, right. So from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. To each according to their need. The rich don't need it, they got it. The poor need it, so we're going to give them to the need. Okay, so that's a classic kind of, does this notion that I just expressed sound familiar?
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, okay, so, because this is the classic impulse of redistributing wealth we have in our culture. Absolutely. That statement, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, is from Karl Marx.
Well, I was going to say it sounds like socialism.
It is. It's Karl Marx.
Yeah.
But you say this now, even maybe if you use a little different words, so it doesn't sound so aphoristic and so clever and like, oh, that sounds like somebody wrote that sometime in the past. But you just explained the ideas. People are, especially young people, they're all for it because they're not the ones who have the ability to give. and then
Right.
are vulnerable to have it taken from them. They're the ones who think they have the need, and so it's given to them. So you can see why that would be popular with the youth. Has nothing to do with justice.
I mean, well, I'm really glad you brought that up. Steven Crowder's made the point before. We're told that capitalism it fosters greed and it's only for the greedy. When really socialism can only work by appealing to people's innate greed and saying, hey, look, you don't have it. Look how much stuff that guy has. We can take it from him and just
Sure.
redistribute
Yeah,
it at the bottom.
I agree. Capitalism is not greed. Capitalism is meritocracy. There's a huge difference. In other words, capitalism is grounded on the idea if you work hard to do something and accomplish something, then you get rewarded for it.
Mhm.
There's merit there. You don't get punished for it. You get merit for it. And incidentally, putting it as greed is another way of saying that it's based on selfishness, because greed is a vice and selfishness is a vice. But there's a difference between selfishness and self-interest.
Right.
For me to want to better my set of circumstances for me and my family, that is not selfish. That it is self-interested, but it's not necessarily selfish. And so if I think, well, what if I do something and start something and invent something and build something out? Okay, wow, then why shouldn't I get, I benefit from it? One of the biggest humanitarian donors in the world is, what's his name? The Microsoft guy.
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates, okay? He wasn't always like that, by the way.
Right.
But by the time he got married, then he got a soft heart. But what Bill Gates, even if he had not done any of that, a lot of people on the political left think, oh, that's all wonderful. And I think it is good. But Bill Gates improved the condition of billions of people on the planet. He created millions and millions of jobs. He created all kinds of opportunity, not just jobs working for Microsoft, but their equipment created other people who wanted to be creative to make new things that other people could use. And in the making of those things, they merit being paid for that. It's a meritocracy. Okay, that's capitalism. You take all of that away. Listen, I traveled in 6 different communist countries behind the Iron Curtain before the Iron Curtain came down. I sat in a restaurant in Kiev in the Ukraine in 1976, and we couldn't get served. Why? Because there weren't waiters, that there was too many people. There's hardly anybody in the restaurant, and there are a lot of waiters standing around. The reason we didn't get served very well, I mean, it took us a long time to get in, is it did not matter whether we got served or not. They got paid exactly the same whether they sold food or not, at least the waiters and stuff, so it didn't matter. It didn't matter because there was no meritocracy. There was no desire to do something that deserved merit or earned merit. Okay, everything shuts down. Okay, they don't invent medications to help people because there's no profit motive. If there's no profit motive, people aren't going to do what they might have to do the things that help people, like in medicines. And there's a whole raft of things like this. So I know the drill. I've seen it plenty of times, and folks who want to push back against that do not understand and call capitalism all greed, whatever, do not understand the way the world works.
No, not at all. And people get mad about Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. It's like, yeah, but you're sitting on your iPhone shopping on Amazon, and everybody's lives are better. They deserve everything they've gotten. And we've been told this lie. Well, at least socialism is more moral than capitalism. And I think even a lot of conservatives kind of fall into the trap of saying, well, socialism is a great idea in theory, but it doesn't work in practice. And it's like, no, it's an immoral idea in theory.
Sure,
you're greedy, and you think, oh, Bill Gates has all that money, I'm just going to take it instead of working hard to earn it. Right. No, that's an immoral idea.
Right. This is my question at this point, Stelman, is when somebody says it's immoral and socialism is more moral, I'm going to ask them, how? Explain it to me. Okay, young college student there with a college loan or parents that are paying your education because they're not paying it themselves. I guarantee you, they can't afford it. I worked myself through college. And I got 2 master's degree, and my folks didn't pay a dime. They didn't even sign off on a loan. Okay, that was things have changed since then, but so it's harder now. I understand that, but somebody else who's benefiting a student from can say these kinds of things. How is it more moral? Can I reach into that person's pocket and take the money out of that person's pocket and give it away to someone I think it's better to give to? Because that person, I don't care who it is you're talking to, is rich compared to the most of the people in the world. So can I just say, hey, you're rich, you don't need this? Are you kidding? You don't need this. Really? No, you don't need this. According to my assessment, I'm going to give it to somebody else. It's better. Well, that's not going to work well with that individual. They're going to consider that a kind of theft. All of a sudden now, socialistic principles are immoral when applied to that person in their circumstance.
Yeah, that's a great point. Steven Crowder's made the point. He's saying, suppose I had $10 in my pocket, right? I'm going to spend it on drugs, and you think, well, that money would be better spent donating to a charity. You still don't have the right to beat me up and take that $10 out of my pocket. And contrast that with capitalism. It's not built on greed, but the brilliance of capitalism is even if you are driven by nothing but greed, you can't get that money without voluntarily trading with other people or creating something that's a social benefit.
That's so important. If I'm driven completely by greed, I mean, you could say in one sense, and you and I both disagreed that that's necessarily the case with people. They're trying to better themselves. That's what America is all about, the American dream and all that. But what if we were just good? Who are these other people to pass judgment on my character, for goodness sake?
Right.
All right? Because even if I'm motivated by greed, as you're pointing out, the notion of the exchange of goods and services is based in almost every single case on complete liberty. We each have the liberty to go where we want and spend what we want on the things that are offered to us. And you know what? If they're too expensive, the price is going to have to come down. If it's too expensive for the rank and file, the price is going to have to come down. That's the nature of the market. And if I don't want to freely give my money for that product, then that product is not they don't take that money away from me to give me the product that they think I should have. Okay. So capitalism is based on freedom. Look, right now in our community, I live in Thousand Oaks in Southern California. Right down the road, there's a Home Depot, and right across the street, they're building a Lowe's. Well, Lowe's is like the other big box store that competes with Home Depot, right? One is orange, the other one's blue. Okay. What do I think about that as a consumer? I'm thrilled.
Yeah.
Because these people across the street from each other now have to compete for my business.
Absolutely.
That means they're going to be falling all over themselves to lower their prices and make better deals and give better service to keep me in their store rather than somebody else's store. Okay. Why? So that they can make the money. Oh, that's greedy. That may be greedy in terms of their motives, if you want to characterize it that way, but who benefits? I benefit. I'm the consumer. I get something better. You put the government in control of that stuff, forget about it. The government can't do anything right. Everything the government does, it does poorly. Some things only the government can do. Manage our borders, fight our wars, okay? And even them, they do it poorly. All right? But, that's what they have to do. Why would we want to put them in charge of everything? Because then everything will be, look, think of this. DMV. I have here. See this thing?
Yes.
I have to get my driver's license renewed. I can't do it by mail because it's been 10 years. I got to go in. With fear and trembling, I look at that letter because it's DMV. Who wants to go in the DMV? It's all run by the local government. It's a pain. Okay. Do you want your life to be DMV? Do you want your medical care all to be like the DMV? No, I've been there. 6 communist countries. I know what it's like. It does not work. And it's never worked anywhere. It's been tried anywhere in the world for the last 100 years, actually 103 years. It was the Russian Revolution, 1916, or maybe it was 1917, 102 years. It hasn't worked, okay, for obvious reasons. You don't have to have a PhD in econ. Anyway, we've kind of gotten off into another thing here a little
Yeah,
bit.
well, it's funny you say that. Because not only does it not work, it tends to be extremely murderous. If you want to evaluate it on moral grounds.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
And yeah, like you were saying, like before UPS and FedEx, like the postal office, they didn't have 2-day shipping, 1-day shipping. It got there when it got there. You hoped.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. But incidentally, because the UPS and those other private things have really worked hard to do the job, the U.S. Postal Service has gotten a lot better. I don't know if you noticed this, but I have over
it's
the
because
last
they have
20 years.
competition.
Because they have some competition, real competition. Now, the other guys can't do letters, but if they could, boy, it'd be all over with for the U.S. Postal Service. You know what I'm saying? It's just the law restricts that level of competition. So, by the way, you mentioned about these regimes, communist regime, socialist regime, being murderous. People offer the canard against religion in general, including Christianity, that religion is called more worship and war and bloodshed, etc., and murder than anything else in history. This is completely false.
Yeah.
No one holds a candle to the millions and millions and millions, over 100 million, that have been killed just at the hands of 3 people. And Hitler is not one of them, just for the record, as bad as he was. I'm talking about Lenin and Stalin and Mao. Atheists all, materialists all, socialist communists all. And by the way, I'm just not guilt by association. There is a connection, a logical connection.
Absolutely.
In the viewpoints and the worldviews and the procedures they carried out. Now, I want to be careful to say that not all atheists do this.
Of course.
However, atheists are allowed to morally. That's the key. Now, somebody's going to take exception to that. And so I have a question. Name me one moral principle that is inherent to atheism that disqualifies genocide. Now, they can't do that because there are no moral principles inherent to atheism. And therefore, even though there are groups of atheists that call themselves humanists to say we're living by a different code, they have no grounds by which they can object to someone like a Mao or a Lenin or a Stalin doing what they did by their own subjectivistic code, which is grounded in power, because without God, that's all that we have left to get what we want done. All right?
Yeah.